3 words to describe Dr. Mike, in your opinion.
Honest, knows what he's doing, and a conservative.
Anything else about Dr. Mike you'd like others to know?
I just met him at the convention. I was pretty impressed. He just impressed me as somebody that's going to represent me, and he's from Utah. I'm going to represent Utahns.
I actually hadn't heard of him until my mother told me about him yesterday, and so we decided to come. I got to hear from Mitt Romney at my college, and so I wanted to hear both sides of the story so I can make an educated guess on him.
What's your thoughts on the campaign so far?
So far, I was very pleased to listen to him and everything he had to say. He seems very family-oriented, and I like that he brought religion into it and used stories that we were all familiar with. I liked hearing everyone's questions and how they asked and how he responded to them, and I look forward to learning more about him.
Great, thank you. And what are your thoughts on Dr. Mike? You just heard him today.
Well, I'm impressed with him. He seems like a decent guy, and I would think he would be a good representative for the state of Utah. And I'm concerned that he may not have the finances that might be necessary to run against a billionaire like Romney. But I think it's totally inappropriate for Romney to come in here just because he's a member of the church and think people ought to vote for him. He's had his opportunities. He was a governor and ran for president and lost. It was disappointing for me because I donated to his campaign. But yeah, I certainly support Mr. Kennedy or Dr. Kennedy.
Describe him to someone else.
Okay. Honest, conservative, good-willed.
Describe Dr. Mike.
Okay. I would say intelligent, extremely disciplined, and very devoted.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today. This is America, isn't it? Welcome. This is the sort of thing that should be happening far more often in beautiful backyards of our great American citizens, that we get together to talk about the issues of the day, and that we work together on those things. That you don't just have somebody who's talking at you, but that person's willing to listen back from you of the things that you are interested in and concerned about. Let's make sure, is this working yet, Mr. David? David's my audiovisual IT chauffeur, chef, helper on the campaign. He does everything for me, and nothing's happening so far, but yeah, just test that and get that going. And it's such a blessing to participate in the process. I am just an average person. I come from fairly difficult circumstances and have grown up in my life and I've been able to attain some things. I've lived the American dream. And I'm so pleased to be here to talk to you about the things that I see that we should be working on. Because literally Utah, yeah, that's part of this conversation. But as you said in your prayer, the United States of America is a big part of this as well. And I want to serve the people. I love the people. I've lived amongst you, raised my family here in this state, built my business here as well. And I want to serve you and make sure that that's your seat, not anybody else's seat. And this is not about me. It's not about my opponent. It's actually about you and making sure that you are represented in that seat. So I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm running for United States Senate. Kennedy's a good name. It's a name that fits politics, but it's usually Democrat Kennedy. Well, this is maybe the first time you've ever met a Republican Kennedy. I don't know. But I'm a conservative Kennedy. I call it the plaid zebra. It's kind of hard to find a plaid zebra, but you'll find them every so often. And so I'm an unusual Kennedy in that I'm conservative and a Republican. And I started off my life in a fairly difficult circumstance, as I mentioned. So I grew up in a fairly modest home. My parents divorced when I was early in my youth, so about 12 or 13 years old is when my parents divorced. And at that time, so there were 7 of us, I was number 2 of 7, and when you split a modest income between 2 households, dad living one place, mom living another, finances became a major problem. And I learned as a child that if I didn't run money, it would run me. So I learned early to work hard, and I started off by cutting grass and raking leaves, and was privileged to work really hard for fairly small amounts of money. I think of those early days of, for $5 a lawn, I did 4 lawns, and I'd meet at my employer's, he had homes that were apartments, I'd meet there, pick up the lawnmower, gas it up, put the gas can, because I needed it again later, on the lawnmower, and I'd push it down to my first lawn and mow that. And it was about a 15-minute walk one way, then I'd walk, cut the next grass, and then it was another 15 minutes. And it probably took me 4 or 5 hours, maybe even 6 hours, to walk all over my hometown cutting this grass, and I got 20 bucks for that. I think, man, that guy got a really good deal out of me. This is back in the 80s, of course, but what it taught me is if you're hungry, you keep pushing that lawnmower. If you're thirsty, you get you try to find a hose nearby and you get a drink out of the hose. And you sweat your way through this work and get it done, and that's how life is moving ahead. And when I got my $20 check, I would put it in the bank and feel good because I had money there instead of no money like usually it seemed like we had. So I learned early to work hard and to save my money. And those were really important lessons for me as a young person. So from there, I loved to learn and study. I went on to college, graduated from college, and that was BYU, and I'm privileged to have gone to BYU now twice. Actually, I'll get to that in just a moment. But I went to college, and then I applied for and got into medical school. So I went to medical school, spent 4 years there, and then went off to my family doctor residency training. So I'm a primary care doctor. I love what I do. It's been a real privilege to work with people to help them solve their problems. And it's mostly they solve their problems with me guiding them. I don't like to tell people what to do. I give them options of what they should do. So I went to medical school, did my residency, and then got this idea to go to law school as well, which I'm grateful I did it, but that was 6 of the longest years of my life because I was working full-time as a family doctor with my family that grew from 4 children to 5 children, and subsequently 8 children is what my wife and I have. And so we were raising our family, going to law school at the same time I was working full-time as a doctor. So if you hold it against me that it took me 6 years to get a 3-year degree in law school, don't hold it against me. It took a long time, not because I was such a laggard, but actually we were doing other things at the same time. So I graduated from BYU Law School, and I was privileged to be able to do that too. So I know a little bit about the law, and I know a lot about medicine. I've been practicing medicine now for 20 years. And then finally in 2012, I was elected to the Utah State Legislature. So it's been a real privilege for me to serve as a Utah State House of Representatives member. And through that period of time, I've served 6 years in the state. And I love the people of Utah. I have raised my family here and built my small business here. But when I went to the legislature, it's been so interesting to deeply ingrain myself in the Utah State specific issues. There are many of them that I knew something about through reading the newspaper, but it was a different experience for me to go to the Utah State Legislature, work with my colleagues in the Senate and in the House, and also with the governor to resolve the issues that we confront in our society. So that's a little bit about where I come from. I want to tell you a bit about why I want to run for this United States Senate position. First, I've already said the most important one, and that's I love the people of Utah. I really feel like this is so important that in this race, that it's all about you and who's going to represent you the best. So to get into that a little more, I want to briefly review a story that all of you are familiar with. It's the story of David and Goliath. David was a shepherd boy, didn't have a whole lot going for him as far as anybody could tell. In fact, when, as you probably know, David was anointed, all of his brothers seemed to be the pick before he got picked. He was just the young guy. Nobody really expected much out of him. But apparently had a lot going for him. So David went out on the field of battle against Goliath, of all things, with nothing more than a stick, a sling, and a bag of stones. It's so impressive that that's all he brought, was what he knew and what he was capable of using. You have certain capabilities and skills. You have brought to the table of life your opportunities to serve, and you are skilled and able to do your duty in life, as am I. I've got certain skills and capabilities as well, and I've already reviewed those. As a doctor, I'm a trained listener. I love listening to people and trying to understand where they're coming from. As an attorney, I'm a trained advocate. I love representing the people's issues and trying to help them move forward. And as a representative in the State House of Representatives, I've learned that working together we can solve even our biggest problems. And that's what it's all about, is a team effort. So why do I bring up the story of David and Goliath? It's not for the reasons that you may suspect. In this story, you're David. David fought for the liberty of his people. That was his only motivation. He was not out there for his own glory and honor, although it came to him as a result of his service to his people. He was out there to free his people from the bondage that was threatened by Goliath and his people who were attacking them. You're David in this story. When it comes to Goliath, Goliath is Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. continues to infringe upon you as the people, continues to raise taxes and take over control, regulatory burden, telling you how to live your lives and control your families. Where am I in that story? I'm your stone, ready to be flung at the foes of liberty. I'm merely a tool for you, and I want to serve you in that role that you serve in trying to fight for the liberty of our people. So I'll finish by saying that I'd love to take any questions that you have, because that's my favorite part, is I want to hear from you. I want to answer your questions. This is your chance to understand who I am, and I would love and be privileged to serve you. That's what this is all about, so that's where the questions come in. But next month, I have 8 children, 5 daughters and 3 sons, and I love my children, and I know you love. All right, tone it down. I'm sorry. I get a little emotional when I think about this, but I love my children, and I know you love your children as well. This is what this is about, is the future. My second daughter is about to have my 3rd grandbaby. Aren't grandbabies a blessing? Do you have a few grandbabies?
I have some great-greats.
And some great-greats.
Yeah.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
It
is you and I together, we need to live today so that my grandchild who's going to be born next month has a future, has an opportunity to move forward with liberty and opportunity to expand their lives and do the things that you and I have done in our lives. I've lived the American dream. I want my grandchildren to live that same dream. And sorry, for that, we need to fight today for the things that are going to help our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, be in a good, solid, and great place. And that's what I stand before you, offering you my services to fight for liberty and make sure that the future is sound because of our good decisions today. I'm Mike Kennedy. I'd be honored to earn your support. And with that, I would love to take your questions. What are your questions that you have for me today? Please.
Several years ago, we were at a meeting like this with Senator Hatch, and I asked him about Obamacare and what the health care that our senators, representatives had, and why we didn't have the same. And his answer was, "Oh, that's complicated." And I thought he'd say, "Oh yeah, I've got to change that," but he didn't. He was just happy with what he had. So do you plan to address that?
It's so very good, and as a leader, I want a leader to be a person of the people. We should be living amongst our people and serving them and understanding them. So here's the reality, and she asked a really good question, and I don't know if is my speaker working, David? Can you hear me okay? Is that better that way? It saves my voice, and so as a legislator, and that's really an important distinction in this race, is my opponent has been an executive. He's been a governor, and I'm grateful for his service. He's a governor for 4 years. I've been a legislator for 6 years. That's a distinction in this race. As a legislator, and this is the answer to the question on some level, is I am one of 535 other people. Well, I'm one of 534 people. Well, I'll say it. One of 535 people, plus a president, that you have to move the issues forward past all those people. And so if I came in, and this is where it's just the reality of, if I came in and said, I want our health plan to be Obamacare to my other legislative colleagues, which I'd love to do. We should live with what everybody else lives with. By the way, Medicare is the same thing. Many of you are covered on Medicare, and I just say that we ought to put the federal legislators on Medicare and then let them live and kind of consume that resource the way you consume it. I think all of a sudden that program might work better for average people when it came to that. So I would deeply, as a matter of fact, I have rejected opportunities for me to raise my own salary. I've rejected blandishments and privilege that come from my legislative as well as my doctor work. I try my best to make sure that I'm making good decisions based on what's best for the people, not what's best for me. That's really an important part. But I also recognize that Senator Hatch, if he goes back and says, hey, I want us all to be on Obamacare or Medicare, I can bet that probably the majority of those people would say, I'm not doing that. Why would I live with that? The reason why they should live with that is that that's what they give to us, right? So I want to be with you. I want to only live the way that you live. And this idea that we should have a separate elite program for us and that it's different for everybody else, I reject that concept. At the same point, I'd try to move that forward amongst people that might not let me do that. So you might not see change, but I would promise to you that I'm not interested in being different from my people that I love and serve. And so I'd like to see that change and would fight to make that change. It's just a matter of, can I get other people to sign off on that too? It's a great question. Thank you very much. And as a legislator, it's sad to watch people come into Washington, D.C. penniless and come out with millions of dollars. And there's something, and I don't know what it is, but there's something going on there that makes me think that the fix is in for the American people and that on your back, a lot of privilege is coming to those that are in these positions. And I just say to you, I've already done that as a professional, and I'm committed, deeply committed, to making sure that I don't benefit from this opportunity to serve you, that I serve you because I want to serve you, and that I am not one of the privileged elite as time goes by. So to that end, I want to continue to be with you. And Glenn, if you and your family would invite me back in the future, as I don't know when did you see Orrin Hatch in this backyard, right? In this situation?
No, it was
something
at
else?
school.
I think, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing in a year or two to do this again? And I'm your senator, and I still come to your backyard in kind of drizzly weather, but what a beautiful day and what a beautiful place. And we talk amongst each other and try to sort through what are the issues of the day and how can we do things better. So I want to continue to be with the people. And Glenn, I hope you make that invitation to me again as your senator in the future. What other questions did you have? Please.
I have one. I served in the legislature also.
Oh, excellent.
From 2000 to 2008.
Nice.
And they told me to sit back and not carry any bills.
Oh, nice.
But I ended up carrying all the immigration bills, the DREAM Act and the driver's license. I took a lot of heat. What I did, I wasn't against those people. I was for obeying the law.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that? Should the law be changed? Can it be changed? Where do you stand on that?
Thanks. He's asking about immigration for those that couldn't hear the question, and it's a great question. I love it. It's really an important one to ask. So I'd say first is a little more background on me, is that my dad is a naturalized American citizen. He was born in Canada, came across the borders. He and my grandfather and my grandmother from Canada, it's probably 70 or 80 years ago that they came across the borders. I think our laws back then were significantly different than they are today. And in fact, it's a little disturbing for me to think about. I hear that there was good migrant worker programs where people could come from outside the country, come here and work, and it was all fine. They would do their work and then they would go back home and they would earn a living. We needed their work and they wanted to work. So it's unusual for me to think about that we had the fix and we kind of lost how to do that right. And for some reason today it's harder. But so I am deeply sympathetic and empathetic for those that want to come to this country, whether just to work here and go home or whether they actually want to come here and live here. And I'm blessed to be an American citizen. I'm so grateful that I was able to be born in this country and raised here. So I want to make sure things work legally for those that want to come here, whether you want to be here to work and go home or whether you want to be here and live. But there's something before that, and I believe it does have to be this priority. When it comes to immigration, we have to make sure our borders are secure. Why? Because if our borders are not secure, people will find that it's easier for them just to cross the borders illegally than it is to apply legally to work here. And so, first, the border needs to be secure. And I stand with Donald Trump in securing our border. He made a promise to the American people that he was going to build a wall. And that wall needs to be built. We should keep our promises that we make on the campaign trail. But more than a wall, we need border security. There are multiple ways to do that. So I stand for border security first. Why? Because if we don't have secure borders, then everything else gets worse. Second thing, we need to work on the legal immigration process to make sure it works for the decent, honorable people that want to come here. If you're a criminal or if you have nefarious or terroristic impulses, we do not want you here. And as soon as we find those, you need to go. In the legal process, get them out of this place if they're in that circumstance. But there are many people that just want to come here and work, and some want to live, and we need to make those systems work. And I'm dedicated to that, but once again, it's kind of back to this, it's not an easy fix. There's a lot of pieces, working parts to that, to make that work. But as a first-generation American on my dad's side, I support those kind of efforts. Thank you for that question. It's a great one. Please.
So as a follow-up, from the polls that I've read, the majority of American people feel the same way you do. They would like to have a wall. They would like to have some restrictions on immigration. Why isn't that not happening? What's the obstacle that prevents that?
It's a great question. He asked, why is the wall not happening? And my suspicion is it has a lot more to do with political gain rather than the benefit to the people. This is where and I've seen this over and over, when we politicize healthcare, when we politicize education, when we politicize immigration, that there's political benefit that comes, then in those circumstances we move in the wrong direction. And I'm afraid there are certain people that are fighting against that because they actually want to make this a political issue. On some level, it seems like some want the borders to be unsecure so that people can just cross freely, but we need to have order associated with that. So I stand with the president, making sure that works in the right way. Thanks for that important question. I think there's a lot of complexities there, but that's part of it. Please.
Well, with your medical and law side, what do you feel about changing the 1935 law about flopping over? We have another citizen.
Which 1935 law are you referencing?
The one where if you're born here, no matter how your mom got in here.
Oh, I see. So natural born citizen based on birth, right? Mm-hmm. And that would take a constitutional amendment to change that.
Would you be in favor of that at all?
I don't know how else do you determine citizenship besides where you're born. It's a great question, and I do believe other countries determine citizenship rights in different ways. So I'd have to study those more. I don't have an easy answer, but right now that's constitutional as far as I understand. And that would take a constitutional amendment, which is a pretty high hurdle to overcome if we're going to change that.
I lived in San Diego for 3 years.
You saw that a lot.
And I saw a lot of it because I lived in Chula Vista is where I lived. And it was so easy to come in.
Yeah.
And to me, it just doesn't seem right.
Ronald Reagan said it best, I believe, when he said that a country without borders is not a country. The question is why would it be so easy to come across our borders? And if it's easy for somebody to come across who just wants to work here or have their child here, boy, what about the terrorists or what about the criminals that are importing drugs and things like that? Border security is not just an immigration issue, it's a national security issue. We need to focus on that, and I'm dedicated to that. Other questions you might have, please.
How do you feel about education in the federal government?
Thanks. It's an important question, and I already talked about politicizing education. Parents of the education process, there's no role for the federal government whatsoever. The reality is that the Federal Department of Education is there. It's been there for, I think, about 50 years. And I guess I can see why the federal government started that on some level. They thought they were going to do some good, but I think they've made things worse. And when it comes to that, keep the federal government out of education. And even for me as a state legislator, I've been committed to making sure even the state is not intervening in the local education process any more than they have to. Because the reality is local school boards, parents and teachers are ideally suited to make sure education goes well for their children. So as your U.S. Senator, I would be dedicated to making sure the federal government does not encroach anywhere that it shouldn't. And education is a great area that the federal government needs to get out of.
Do you think we could get rid of the Department of Education?
I don't believe so right now that quickly. One of the real dynamics there is about 10% of our state school budget comes out of the Federal Department of Education. And guess where that money goes? Special needs children and school lunch programs. So to say, I'm going to eliminate the Department of Education, many of our citizens in our state would say, well, what's going to happen to my blessed little child who has special needs, and the federal funds are actually what's supporting them in that. So the idea that you can just wind those down and make those programs disappear, you need to figure out where that 10% of the state budget comes from, and you're talking billions of dollars so if I remember right, so our budget is $16.7 billion in the state of Utah. And if I remember right, about $6 billion of that is public education. It's a big piece of money. So the idea that 10% of that just disappears, you better figure out how to backfill that before you make those changes. So, but I would be invested in making sure that the Federal Department of Education's role does not grow, and that if I can make that role shrink and let the state do what it's capable of doing, that's what I would be focused on. Thank you for that great question. Other questions you might have? Please.
is your stand on medical marijuana?
Thanks, that's a great one, and I like it a lot. It's very interesting. I've been thinking about this for a long time. So I've been using chemistry with humans for 20 years now, and our pharmaceutical companies, it's miraculous what they can do for us. So many of us are actually healthy and alive because of the miracle of modern day pharmaceutical companies. When it comes to medical marijuana, I believe that there is some merit to that substance. How do I use it though? What's the milligram per kilogram dose? What's the cross reactions and side effects associated with how that chemical interacts with other chemicals, interacts with the human body? What's the difference between a cream, a gummy bear, a brownie, a gel, a liquid, a pill? The reality is when I start asking those questions to those that advocate for medical marijuana, they have a hard time answering those, because usually it's just like the herbal shop that you go over and you just pick up some gummy bears and you chew on them, and I guess you get whatever benefit you get, and somebody just recommends them. Well, when it comes to chemistry, I understand there can be some serious repercussions associated with the use of medicines in humans, and so I want more studies for it. Besides the fact that a lot of times medical marijuana, as Colorado and Oregon and others have demonstrated, it's not medical, it's recreational. They don't just want anybody who has a condition to use this. They want everybody to have it available for whatever they want to use it for. So the state of Utah is moving forward on that, and I support the state of Utah's efforts to move forward on that. In the federal area, I believe that we should actually reclassify marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. And what that means, Schedule 1, that's where heroin lives, that's where cocaine is, that's where ecstasy and LSD, methamphetamines, all of those bad drugs, they're in Schedule 1. Marijuana's in there too. That makes it so you can't study it. It's really difficult to get data and evidence on it as a result. But if I were able to move that to Schedule 2, then we could do studies and research that would help me to know what to do with this substance. So that's my answer to that. And I do think we should move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. That would help us to understand what to do. Thanks for that question. Great one. Any others that you had? Please, yeah.
I was curious how you came about to be a candidate for this hatch. Apparently you must have some people who thought you were doing things well and that they thought you might be a good candidate. I'm not really familiar with your background or what happened during the Republican convention. I understand that it was quite a battle, and I'm glad to see that you survived.
I am too, so is my wife.
Is, his carpetbagger. Have you ever taken that approach to his? I think, I was really supportive of him. I always thought he was a great guy, would be a great candidate for president. When he was lost, I was really disappointed. Probably because I'd also contributed to some funds. But since then, his outrageous comments about Trump, I think he just doesn't know when to shut up. And so, if you're a dirty dog, I'd vote for you. But I'm pleased to see that you're a decent.
Hopefully I'm a little better than that, yeah.
And I think we really need to support you.
Thank you. It's always good to hear from my citizens. And let me tell you a little bit about my path to being in your backyard today to talk to you as a U.S. Senate candidate. And the story might get a little long. I try to keep my answers shorter. I don't want to bore you with these conversations, but I think that's a really important question that you ask. A year ago this month is when I first started thinking about this. And I'll just tell you first, I love my average life. I love being a doctor. I love taking care of my children. I read to them every night when I can. A book. My children and I, we read a chapter a night in any number of books that we pick. And I have done some things. I love my state legislative work. I love being in my community and going out camping with my son with the Boy Scouts and things like that. So the idea in May of last year settled onto me, and I thought, why would I want to do that? Washington, D.C. is, we all know what we think about Washington, D.C., and it's the sort of place, really? I have to go and live in Washington, D.C. and work there? I love what I do in the state legislature. We actually solve problems in the state legislature. We move things forward. It seems like in Washington, D.C., all they do is fight about things. I call it sound bites instead of sound judgment. They seem to always be looking to get on the news instead of just get things done. And to me, government should work for the people. So over the several months that elapsed between now and then, is I had to reconcile and come to grips with, really? Do I need to do this? Should I do this? And I talked, ultimately, I revealed my madness to my wife, and she and I talked, and independent of each other, we really felt like it was my time. I'm 49 years old. The crucible of life has burned many impurities out of me. I've learned to work hard, and I've learned to do things that even 10 and 15 years ago I never could have done. And I felt like life is I'm walking down a corridor, and doors on either side are available for all of us through life. Doors of choices that we have to make. Some doors you have to insert multiple keys to open that door. Some doors you really have to push hard on. Others are just wide open, and you can walk in and do whatever it is that's in that room. This was one of those opportunities that I felt like it was my time to offer my services to the people of Utah. And so far, I'll just tell you, it feels like it's going exactly how it should have gone. We actually beat Governor Romney 51 to 49% at convention, which we expected, but very few outside of our campaign understood that that was what was going to happen. That was in spite of being outspent 15 to 1 on that convention result, and in spite of the fact that Governor Romney's worked really hard to get his people there as delegates, which that's part of the process, and I'm grateful that he's working the process really hard. So now he and I are going to the primary ballot on June 26th, the mail-in ballots, and I'll just encourage you to keep your eyes open because your ballots are going to show up in the mail. And I hope I can earn your support because I need every one of you to be there. But that's all there is to it to me. It's not the opponent. It's not, this is Orrin Hatch's seat. It's not even for me that I'm doing this. It's because I believe that the people of Utah deserve a representative that will serve them and knows them. And I've lived here and I've worked here, I've raised my family here. And I love this place. That's why when I found this place, I stayed here and built my business and raised my family here. And if I were the people of Utah, that would mean a lot to me because I want somebody who's going to work for the people, not work for other interests that are different than the people. So that may answer some of your questions. There's probably some more to it, but that's why I am today where I am. That's some of the path that I've taken to get here. Thanks, please. Oh, yes, ladies first, yes.
My question is what do you want to accomplish in D.C.? Thanks.
It's a great question. And the three things I want to accomplish are deficit reduction, and deficit reduction. It's like location. I don't think there's anything in our society that threatens us more than our national debt. And this recent omnibus bill that was passed is a reflection of this is not right. We are not heading on the right path. And for your great-great-grandchildren, for my grandbaby being born next month, is we cannot continue to live like this and expect the future to be secure for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. The opulence of today is going to be paid in spades by mortgaging and bankrupting our children's future. And I can't stand that. So for me, the first thing is we've got to get the deficit under control. And then people say, well, what do you want to do to get the deficit under control? And I'm just me. And I just say it like I think, and there are many different things that other people might think. So I respect those differences of opinions. But I just say, first, don't make it any worse. When an omnibus bill rolls by like that, for me, it's just a no. That's all I'm going to do is vote no. Reportedly, and I am not a Washington insider, but I've talked to a few of them on this campaign trail. That bill was drafted by 4 people. The Senate and the House, majority and minority leadership. 4 people wrote that omnibus bill. Nobody else even had a chime in on it, supposedly. I don't know the details, but that $1.3 trillion bill, that was less than 48 hours to read and understand what's in there, that was passed with only 4 people drafting it. And I just say on process and on substance, I'm not gonna vote for that. So the first thing is don't make it worse. And the second thing is, how do we work forward on this? Well, I'd like it all next year to be gone. We've got, as you probably know, and I can't even imagine these numbers. If I had a blackboard behind me, it would be very entertaining to write the number 21 and then enough zeros to get to a trillion on that number. These are numbers that you and I never see. We can't even imagine them, and it's an exercise of disturbance when you write that kind of number up on the board. But the interesting and sad reality behind that $21 trillion deficit is that's what's on the books for what we owe. We owe reportedly over $100 trillion to ourselves in the form of Medicare and Social Security. And it's one of those things that it's a daunting task. When we're thinking about Goliath in Washington, D.C., I can't even imagine anything bigger than our debt. So how do we work on that? We all need to work on that together. First, we do need to keep our promises to our people. Those that are in, for example, Medicare and Social Security, we can't take those systems away as they are. By the way, I'll warn you, those systems already are changing. They're rationing your health care right now because they just don't have the money. I've already seen that as a doctor trying to write prescriptions. The government says, you can't have that, and they won't pay for it because they don't have the money. And so already they're making cuts on these programs. They're not keeping the promises they've made to the American people. But when it comes to those programs or any others, we have to look across the board is how do we make those programs better? And one thing I'd say on some of the big ones that are really important, let's take Social Security, is I'm 49 years old. I've got time to plan and prepare for Social Security. If they change the program for me, which they should, or for somebody who's 10 years old or 5 years old or not even born, those programs, we should make promises that we can keep to those people, and those promises make those programs less. To me, that's just common sense. Does it make sense? And then when you've got a 49-year-old who can adapt and change so that the program's going to save money by the time I enter those programs, then I'm all for those kind of gradual movements in the right direction. And then, is there waste in government? Is there waste in government, do you think? Is there waste in state government? Yes. I've seen it even in the state government, let alone the federal government. There are places that we can make a cut that aren't going to hurt anybody. So one of the things that I've heard about, and I like the concept, but I'd even shrink it a little bit more, they call it the penny plan, is if you take a 1% cut across the board for everybody, Armageddon is not going to happen for any program. It's not going to blow up any program. It's going to kind of hurt. But what happens in our personal economies when we don't have money? If something happens and money's not flowing, we tighten our belts and we cancel things that we don't need. That's just what we do. You and I live on a budget. Our government should live on a budget. It just makes sense to me. So the idea of let's all work together, and what usually happens is Republicans want to cut Democrat programs, Democrat want to cut Republican programs. No. This is for all of the country, for the future, is we all take a little piece, not for our own benefit, but for the future of our society. So I focus on that primarily. That's my message. My second message is related to that, and that's the border. We've already talked about it. A country without borders is not a country. So national security in the form of deficit reduction, and we need our border secure. Those are two fundamental things. And then I call Washington, D.C. a target-rich environment. There's so many things to work on. You could pretty well point in any direction and there's a problem to solve. And so as a problem solver, that's what I've been doing my whole life, is trying to work on solving problems for my patients in the state legislature, in the law school training, and in this case, in the opportunity to serve as your U.S. senators. So let's just get in there, roll our sleeves up, and get the work done that we need to do. Thanks for that question. That's what I would focus on. One more question if you had one, and then we need to move on. Thank you.
Term limits.
Thanks. Term limits. Tell me why you think term limits are a good idea.
Well, Mike Lee said no, because if you get a good guy in there, you don't want to lose him, which I can see that side, but it seems like they get in there and they're the old boys club, you know, everybody has to scratch everybody's back. How do you keep from being put into that situation? You know, you may start out really great, but, you know, Mike's held it, but that must be really tough. It's
a good question. I love the term limit question. It's really an important one, and I've already committed to myself that you're making a really important point. And I look to the Bible and the Old Testament. There was an outstanding person named Solomon, turned into King Solomon, and he's the decent, honorable person as a youth that when he was ascending to the kingship, he asked God not for wealth or riches or long life. He wanted a wise and understanding heart so he could do the task. And I find that to be inspiring. That's the kind of leader I want. But if even he, with enough time, could become corrupted, clearly there's something wrong about staying in these seats of power for any longer than you need to. So I've thought for myself, at 49 years old, you think, all right, how long can you last and not get corrupted by the process, right? I don't know what the answer to that is. I've never been there. But I would say, okay, 49, add on 6 years and another 6, well, maybe 3 terms, 18 years. Part of my thing is 18 years would be enough to get things done, but not so much to become something that I don't want to become on some level. So I've term limited myself. I've made this commitment over and over on the campaign trail. I'm not staying there longer than 18 years. I am not coming out of the Senate as a mummified relic that is going to immediately go into the nursing home because I can't even speak my own words anymore, sort of thing. So I do feel like we ought to term limit ourselves, and I have term limited myself, and I'll keep that commitment to you and the people of Utah, whether or not you think I'm doing a good job 18 years from now. By the way, you need to hire me for the first term. I don't even know if I'm going to make that first cut, right? But beyond that, it's the sort of thing that I'm not coming out of the Senate in a hospital gurney. I want to make sure that I still have some natural life in me, that I could spend time with my grandchildren and things. So, but then the question overlaying that is, well, what do we do with legislators generally? They're not going to term limit themselves. You notice the legislature term limited the president. Why didn't they term limit themselves? If that was good for the goose, it should be good for the gander, right? We all know why that is. And the question on policy is, could we, okay, all of you legislators currently serving, this doesn't impact you, but for future legislators, we could term limit you. That's a conversation that we ought to have, is future legislators. Here's the problem. Is guess what the future legislators come in and do? They take it, they roll it back, and so I mean, they write the rules. So it's one of those things that I know it's hard to change, but I've committed to myself and also to the people that I'm not staying there forever. I will move on. I'll finish by saying thank you very much for being here.